With me is political analyst Dr. Piet Croukamp from the Northwest University, and we're going to discuss President Cyril Ramaphosa's National Dialogue and the first convention held in Pretoria that have been described by some participants as chaotic. Also under discussion is an article he wrote about Sports Minister Gayton McKenzie. Hi, Piet. Welcome again.
Good day.
So you've written an interesting article about Gayton McKenzie, and in South Africa, he's in hot water at the moment because of racist tweets of the past that have resurfaced, and it's being investigated by the Human Rights Council of South Africa. But you've gone into his past and you found something more apart from the fact that he was an ex-convict.
Yeah, I think you suggested that he might be in hot water. We don't know because Gayton McKenzie is what we generally refer to as a colored person in South Africa. And he's got a black mother. And he made remarks about black people and colored people, which could be offensive if you're white when you express those views. But the question is, can black people be racist? You remember that's a question that's been coming out of the work debate for years now. We don't know. And the Human Rights Commission is investigating it. But is it possible to now suddenly change the narrative and say, yes, black people, somebody with a black mother who is labeled in terms of the old apartheid law as a colored, can indeed be racist, saying something about either coloreds or black people? So we don't know if he's in hot water. And I think the president will find it hard to dismiss him from his cabinet based on any of these questions, because then the president must agree that black people can be racist. And I think it's going to be a difficult one. Yes. So what I did is I looked around. In fact, it was an economist, Theo Forster, who reminded me of a black economic empowerment deal where Gayton McKenzie was involved in 2010 about Goldfields. In terms of South African law, especially the mining companies, 26% of the shares must be owned by historically disadvantaged people, which is the black South Africans. And they needed to get black economic empowerment partners very, very quickly because they wanted to buy the deepest gold mine in South Africa. It's called the South Deep Mine. And it's in the western area, 45 kilometers from Johannesburg. So they desperately needed to get the mining license and the mining permit for that mine. So they, in some other way, they stumbled upon a future or a past fugitive of the law. Somebody's been found guilty of I think, bank robbery, armed robbery. And they decided to convince him to put together a black economic empowerment deal for them, find partners, and it must be broad-based. In other words, we want a large number of partners. We don't want one partner. We want several people to make up this black economic empowerment consortium, which we can then use to in our application for this particular mining license. And that's where Gayton McKenzie came in, and he said, I can do that. I can do that. And you will know from the Goldfields is also on the New York Stock Exchange, and they have very strict rules and regulations in terms of which companies must operate that is listed on the stock exchange. You cannot have criminals, unvetted criminals, on your as a director or a partnership or part of the shareholders agreement. It is illegal to do so, and it can have severe sanctions for a company that does that. In any case, so they got him, and then he put together a list of his best friend, also a jailbird, and he gave him 61 million share in the company, and he gave his mother-in-law shares in the company, and he gave his hairdresser shares in the company, and somebody for some other reason needed to teach him how to speak publicly, and that person got shares in the company. Okay, all this, I think, one can safely say, is a facade for him getting involved people from whom he can benefit eventually. And he was paid 1.5 million rand a month to put together this consortium. So you can see he put together a consortium of people which he can milk afterwards again, and then benefit from that particular deal again. So everything went wrong. It is a criminal who, and by the way, he's now a minister, and he's a member of parliament, and he's got a history of being a criminal. And this particular case is, I don't know if it's illegal, but I do know it's unethical. I do know it shouldn't have happened. I do know that South African regulatory authorities, as well as that in America, has judged Goldfields harshly. They've apologized for it. It had massive consequences for the mine. How they ended up in that particular situation, God knows. And there goes Gayton McKenzie. He's still a very prominent politician, the Minister of Sport in South Africa. That's how it works.
Well, if you look at, what he's involved with, one of the things for South Africa is the Formula One Grand Prix bid that he's very keen on. I mean, he's been rubbing shoulders with senior people from Formula One, and that is an American company. Could this latest rumors, it takes long in South Africa for any, whether it's the Human Rights Commission or to come to a decision, could that affect South Africa's Grand Prix bid possibly negatively?
I don't know, because you remember that the American regulatory authorities in, I think, 2015, they walked away from the investigation, and it's not as if they cleared Goldfields, but they just, the investigation stopped, and they said, okay, let's just go on as if nothing has happened. And the suggestion was, if you ask around, that maybe it is because the company already took rather drastic steps. Holland was the CEO of the company. He gave up his bonus, which is significant in the mining industry. The head of legal services resigned. Nobody knows why. Abruptly walked away immediately from the job. And the company issued an apology. I think they did most of the rituals that you would associate with a company that will have to do certain things if they're found guilty and there's a certain sanction applied. So I think they preemptively acted in a way that allowed the American regulatory authorities to say, okay, good, we accept the status quo and we all move on. It could be that the same applies now. Unless somebody tries to make political hay out of this and put this out in the media. Remember, I write for a little newsletter. We have 3,000 people, 2,000 people reading it. It didn't make much ripple effect. It didn't have much of a ripple effect in South Africa. But eventually, I think if we do talk about the F1 in South Africa, it could possibly be that some of the news media might. In fact, I can just call somebody and I'm sure they will carry the story again. But it has been carried by Ambugane and by television news in South Africa. But that was in 2014, 2013. I think most people just forgot about it again. But of course, the issue can come to the fore again. Yes.
Can we talk about the national dialogue and what happened with what President Ramaphosa was hoping for a moment whether he can bring people together, and then so many foundations opted out of it. So what was your perception of what happened there?
Look, one must ask yourself the question, what is the origin of the idea of a national dialogue? It is not President Ramaphosa's idea. It is not the ANC's idea. The first time I became aware of push in that direction was when Thabo Mbeki, I think it was at the funeral of Jesse Duarte, suddenly in public, with all the cameras there, he suddenly accused the President Ramaphosa of not eventually putting together what he called the social compact that the president promised in one of the sonas. Said, I will put together a social compact of South Africans and set certain targets of what it needs to achieve. That social compact is just another word, I think, eventually for the national dialogue. And then when the ANC did badly in May 2024, suddenly Mbeki mooted the argument again about a national dialogue, and his argument was we need to have a national dialogue. But I think that was in reference to the people of South Africa who stopped voting for the ANC, because only 15.6% of the eligible vote voted for the ANC, only 23% of the registered vote, and they got, say, 40% in the National Assembly. So that the argument was that maybe there's a degree of rejection of the liberation movement, and we should ask society, we ask the people. But there was always the feeling that Thabo Mbeki is trying to set Ramaphosa up for failure, because he knew this discussion will focus very specifically not only on the 9 wasted years of Jacob Zuma, but we are also now going for 9 wasted years under Ramaphosa, because in terms of every metric, every statistic, growth is lower, unemployment is high. Per capita, for the last 12 years, South Africans are getting poorer. There is not a single statistic that I can think of now immediately that Ramaphosa has managed to turn around and improve on what has happened under Jacob Zuma. And I think that's what Thabo Mbeki is trying to do. He's trying to point him out. Somehow there is this conflict and this nervous point, stress point between Thabo Mbeki and Ramaphosa. And Ramaphosa has gone into this reluctantly. The ANC has gone into this reluctantly, but you have at least 3 voices in the National Executive Committee of the ANC. It's, call it if you wish, the Ramaphosa faction or group, and then there's the Paul Mashatile faction, and they use all the capital that they can muster to undermine Ramaphosa in several ways. And Ramaphosa don't resist. They actually allow Paul Mashatile to do what he wants to do. But then there's another voice, and that's the voice of Thabo Mbeki. He attends all these NEC meetings. NEC is the most important, most authoritative institution in between elections in the ANC. If they make a decision, it becomes the decision. That's what it will be executed. It has to be by the executive or by the leadership of the ANC. And in that meeting, Thabo Mbeki keep on raising his voice, keep on going against the grain of the wishes in the interest of Ramaphosa, keep on targeting him, accusing him of bad governance, accusing him of not fulfilling the obligations of the 55th conference, the decision that was made there. Keep on suggesting that he's not living up to the ideals of the liberation movement, and sorts of, rather directly quite often. And the National Dialogue is a brainchild of Thabo Mbeki that Ramaphosa has no choice but to seek to, in some other way, make work. He's doing so reluctantly, and the last meeting that we had on the 15th of August, it was the first meeting, the first big meeting where people were involved. 1,000 people gathered at UNISA, and it was a war zone. It was a war zone. The speakers went after the ANC. So much so that Paul Mashatile, the deputy president, at one stage had enough and he walked out. But the audience made it known that they don't appreciate him leaving. And he had to return later on. So what Ramaphosa expected, this will be something where the popular society will turn on the ANC. It's exactly what happens.
So is that what we have now? I mean, the society turning on both Ramaphosa and Mashatile.
Yeah, I've spoken to a number of people who attended now, and the idea was that this meeting with 1,000 people, which you must be very naive if you think 1,000 people will come together, and they will provide you with a roadmap of how will we go forward from now on to actually execute this wonderful idea of a national dialogue. It was a war zone. They disagreed about everything. Most people were there to insult the government and then insult the deputy president. From what I've heard, and what I've seen, nothing exists now in the aftermath that points towards where will we be going to with this discussion. Yes, we know there will be a budget. They spent 20 million in this one meeting. There's 420 million, 440 million available. They spent 20 million on this very first 2 days. But there's no roadmap of how will we actually make this thing work. They say now we start with WhatsApp groups, and there will be meetings throughout the country. Whoever manages those meetings, if it's a member of the ANC, they will just be abused by the people who live in dire poverty in South Africa, massive unemployment in South Africa, alienation, and to a large degree being abandoned by government, especially at local government level. And they have to have these meetings in the rural areas and in the peri-urban areas and in the townships and in the shanty towns, informal settlements. The ANC is going to be sorry about this. They will spend 440 million rand for South Africans to tell them how useless they are. That's what's going to happen.
So even with the foundations not there, like the Tutu Foundation, the Mbeki Foundation, etc. Even then, the people on the floor were also speaking against the government. You find that surprising because Ruth Meyer was there, and it was quite nice seeing him next to Ramaphosa. But he must have wondered, where did this all go wrong?
I can tell him where it goes wrong. I know Rolf. I think of him as a friend. I watched the TV program one night, and he said that black and white South Africans must come together again, and we must reconsider and reconcile our relationship. Look, racism is rife in South Africa, but South Africans now need economic growth. They need employment. They need opportunities. They need proper school for their children. They need health care. On the priority list of priorities, racial relationships is not, don't ask the people now to settle that problem. They now need survival. They need the means and the care to look after their children. The priorities is completely different for most South Africans now, even the wealthy. Remember, if the per capita income has declined for 12 to 15 years in a row, everybody is worse off. Everybody is poorer. Nobody now wants to talk about race relations. Everybody wants to talk, how do we get the economy growing? And you know what is the big problem? That's what I said to some of these people who do attend. If we want to talk about a national dialogue, the ANC and the government must come to the table and say, yes, it's obvious that we do things wrong. We don't get economic growth. We're repeating this now for 12, 15 years. We don't have economic growth. We don't solve the problems of unemployment and poverty in South Africa. We have to do something else. And we're now willing to listen to other people with better plans. But the ANC will not change its mind. In the last few weeks, and the president has said several times, almost as if he wants to drive the point home, we will not renegotiate or reconsider black economic empowerment. And if you ask any business, anybody doing that possible investor in South Africa, ask the mining bosses in the mining industry, they will all tell you the same thing. The cost and the increased risk of black economic empowerment, if it is the type of privileged elite enrichment that William Gumede talks about when he says that 100 people in South Africa in the last 30 years benefited 1 trillion rand. If nobody will invest in the economy that has that requirement that you have to further enrich another 100 industrialists, another further 100 cadres, 100 ANC members. And that the ANC don't want to negotiate that. But that's the reason for the fact that there's a lack of trust in our economy, a lack of trust in our management system, lack of trust in our policies. Money flows towards solid policies that are pliant and you can negotiate, that you can reconsider, and that you can mold until it suits a particular industry or a particular capital owner's interest. You have to negotiate these things. The ANC wants to come to the table in the national dialogue. They don't want to negotiate anything. They want to enforce their policies. They want to retain the policies that has done us so much harm. Because, and that's the important thing, if the first person to say, let's reconsider these policies, will be the one that will be taking all the flack and all the acrimony that you can imagine within the ANC. That person, if President Ramaphosa says we must renegotiate black economic empowerment, you can find the back door, because that's what where they will point him towards. So nobody is prepared to make that very difficult decision. That's the problem with the ANC. They're not prepared to take the difficult decisions which will get the economy growing.
And I see The Economist magazine also came out, thrashing BEE.
Yeah, it increases the cost of doing business. And just remember, that's just one aspect of it. If you don't have roads, if you don't have railroads, if the ports are not working, if you have crime where 75 people get killed a day, the National Prosecuting Authority is not effective in actually eventually prosecuting people. The police, by and large, corrupt. Listen to what General Makwenazi said about the police. He may be wrong, may be right, but we know that's what's going on. We know the filth and the dirt inside government and inside the police. I mean, in other words, you bring your money is not safe. Your infrastructure is not safe. The cost of doing business is high. Communication is high. Once you've manufactured something, how do you get it onto the road? How do you get it onto the logistics system? How do you get it through the ports? How do you get it to be exported? And Donald Trump is making it a little bit more difficult for us by just charging 30% tariffs. If you want to be competitive in a foreign market and you have all this higher risk of investing in the South African economy, you don't have a fair chance. Who would bring their money to South Africa? There are so many other jurisdictions where the government is willing to consider the type of conditions that will make it possible for your particular investment to come to fruition.
Dr. Piet Croukamp, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me.